Hey first grade, welcome back. It's me, Mrs. Lamb. Today for CKLA Listening and Learning, we're actually going to begin Domain 3, and it is titled Different Lands, Similar Stories. That's right, we're going to start reading fiction or make-believe stories again. If you'll remember, stories have certain things they need to have. First, you must have characters, which will answer your question, who? A story needs to have setting, which is the time and place of the story, answering the question, where? And then story needs plot. You may have also heard it called beginning, middle, and end. So basically, what happened? Well, another element that stories tend to have is conflict, which is kind of like the big bump, bump, bump. The conflict in the story is the problem that the character faces. Characters in different stories from around the whole world might have similar conflicts or problems that they must deal with. That's right, people all around the world love listening to stories. In fact, some of the stories around the world are quite similar to each other. This means that parts of the stories are the same, even though the stories are from different places around the world. So today we're going to read a story that originated in the country of France. You'll see it right here in blue. Today we're going to read the story of Cinderella. You may have heard this one before. It's one of my personal favorites. Do you like Cinderella? Awesome. Well, this story is a special type of folk tale. You remember you've learned about those before, called a fairy tale. And fairy tales feature members of royal families, characters with special powers or magic, and sometimes there are even magical transformations. Some things that happen in fairy tales are fantasy, or they can't really happen, and others are real, which means they could really happen. I want you to listen carefully today to identify the parts of the story that are real or fantasy. Once there was a poor girl who was called Cinderella. Cinderella lived with her stepmother and two stepsisters. Her stepmother was mean to Cinderella and forced her to do the hardest and dirtiest work in the house. The poor girl had to scour the dishes, scrub the floors, and wash the clothes, all by herself. When her work was finally done, Cinderella would sit, tired and alone by the fireplace, among the ashes and cinders. That is why they called her Cinderella. Doesn't sound like a very nice nickname to me. Cinderella's stepsisters lived in splendor. They were extra fancy. They had the best of everything. They had soft beds, thick carpets, and silver-edged mirrors. Poor Cinderella had to sleep on the floor next to the fire. One day, the king's son, the prince, announced that he was going to be holding a ball at the royal palace. It would be a grand evening of dancing, and all the young ladies in the kingdom were invited. Would you like to go to a ball? I know I would. Get all dressed up and fancy. Yes. When they heard the announcement, Cinderella's stepsisters shrieked with excitement. For days, they primped in front of their mirrors and talked of nothing but the ball. They shouted orders at Cinderella and ran her ragged while they got ready for the ball. "Cinderella!" shouted the older stepsister. "Shine my shoes!" "Cinderella!" called the younger. "Iron out the wrinkles in my dress!" Cinderella helped her stepsisters get ready without complaining. Silently, however, she was longing to go to the ball. She imagined herself dancing in the arms of the prince. How wonderful it would be, and yet she knew her stepmother would never allow her to go. At last the time came. The stepsisters and their mother left for the palace. Cinderella watched them drive away. When she lost sight of them, she began to cry. She felt so miserable and alone. Oh, poor Cinderella. I wonder if there's anything we can do to help. I wonder who that could be. But Cinderella was not alone after all. She heard a gentle voice ask, "What's the matter, dear?" She looked up and saw a woman with a kind face. I wish I could," began Cinderella, but she could not finish for all her tears and sobbing. "You wish to go to the ball?" Is that it?" said the kind woman. "Why, yes," said Cinderella with surprise. "Then it shall be so, Cinderella, for you are a kind girl, worthy of going to the ball," said the woman. For you see, the woman was Cinderella's fairy godmother. "Now run into the garden," she said to Cinderella, "and bring me a pumpkin." What's she gonna do with a pumpkin? Cinderella went to the garden, puzzled. She must have been confused too. She picked a large pumpkin and set it on the ground before the kind woman. The fairy godmother tapped it with her magic wand, and it turned into a dazzling coach lined with satin. "Now, dear," said the fairy godmother, "bring me the mouse trap from the house." Cinderella brought the trap, which had 6 live mice in it. The fairy godmother released the mice and waved her hand over them, turning them into a fine set of 6 gray horses. Then, with a touch of her wand, she turned a big rat into a fat, jolly coachman with long, fancy whiskers. "Well," said the fairy godmother with a smile, "what do you think? Are you pleased? Are you ready to go to the ball?" "Oh, yes!" cried Cinderella, "but must I go in these dirty rags?" Her godmother laughed. Then, with a touch of her wand, she changed Cinderella's tattered clothes into a glittering gown of gold. On her feet appeared a pair of glass slippers, the prettiest in the world. Wow, that is a really pretty dress, don't you think? Me too. Cinderella stepped into the coach, but before she left, her fairy godmother gave her a stern warning. "Do not stay at the ball after midnight, not even a moment." Things got real serious right there. "When the clock strikes 12, the coach will once again be a pumpkin, the horses mice, the coachman a rat, and your gown the same clothes you had on." Cinderella promised she would leave before midnight. Then, calling out her thanks, away she rode in the coach, feeling happier than she had ever felt before. When Cinderella arrived at the ball, everyone admired her beauty. The prince asked Cinderella to dance with him. They danced together once, then twice, then again and again. Cinderella's face shone with happiness. Everyone at the ball looked on in admiration. Everyone, that is, but the 2 stepsisters. They glared jealously at the lovely lady, though they had no idea that they were glaring at Cinderella because they didn't recognize her in her beautiful gown. For Cinderella, the music, the dancing, the warm gaze of the prince all seemed a wonderful dream. How quickly time slips away when the heart is happy. As Cinderella began to dance again with the prince, she heard the palace clock begin to toll. "Oh my!" she gasped. "What time is it?" "Midnight," said the prince. "Midnight?" Cinderella's cheeks grew pale. She turned and, fast as a deer, ran out of the ballroom. She sprinted down a long hallway, then down a staircase. At the foot of the stairs, she stumbled. One of her slippers fell off, but Cinderella could not stop. As she ran breathlessly out of the castle into the darkness, she heard the clock strike midnight and felt her smooth gown turn into the rough cloth of her everyday clothes. Her dazzling coat had turned back into a pumpkin, so she ran home alone. When she got there, she realized she was still wearing one glass slipper. When Cinderella had run away, the prince had raced after her. Although he did not catch her, he did find, partway down the staircase, the glass slipper that had fallen off her foot. And that is why, the very next morning, the sound of trumpets woke the kingdom. The prince announced that he would marry the woman whose foot fit the glass slipper. He sent his men out on a mission. They were to try the slipper on the foot of every maiden in the land. From house to house they went, trying the slipper on foot after foot. On one foot, the slipper was too long, on another too short. And so it went until they came to the house of Cinderella and her stepsisters. Cinderella's stepsisters tried to fit their feet into the slipper. They squeezed, pinched, and pushed, but the slipper would not fit. Then, in the shadows, Cinderella stepped forth and said, "Let me see if it'll fit me." You, the stepsisters cried. That's ridiculous. Every young woman in the kingdom is supposed to try on the slipper. That includes me, stated Cinderella. Well, she is right. That is what the prince said. The prince's men agreed, as the prince had given strict instructions that every maiden in the kingdom was to try on the slipper. One of the men placed the slipper on Cinderella's foot, and it fit perfectly. The stepsisters' mouths dropped open in astonishment. They were even more shocked when, from her pocket, Cinderella drew forth the other glass slipper. Only then did the stepsisters understand the beautiful lady they had seen at the ball was Cinderella. They threw themselves at her feet and begged for forgiveness. Cinderella was so kind-hearted that she forgave them and embraced them. Cinderella married the prince. Her stepsisters and stepmother were invited to live in the palace, and her and the prince lived happily ever after. The end. That was a wonderful story. Let's go ahead and take a brain break, and then we'll get into some questions about it. All right, guys, so for our brain break today, we're gonna play pretend. We're gonna pretend that we are at the ball with Cinderella. So go ahead and get up, because if you're at a ball, you have to dance. So let's get up. And now let's pretend it's our turn to dance with the prince. Or you can pretend you are the prince. Whichever works for you. All right, let's go. Awesome. Now pretend that you're one of the stepsisters spying on Cinderella. Okay, let's do one more. Pretend you are a chicken at the dance. Ah, the cook! Okay, so now that we've got some giggles and some wiggles out, let's go ahead and answer some questions about the story we read today. Question number 1, who is the main character? Remember, all stories have characters, and they answer the question, who? And so in this story, you're telling me the main character was? Correct, Cinderella. All right, so just a quick bonus question for you. How did she get her name? How did she get the name Cinderella? Was she born with it? You're right, no, she wasn't. It was a nickname that her stepsisters and her stepmother came up for her because when she would sleep by this fireplace, the cinders or the little tiny bits of fire from when the fire is going out would make her dirty. And so they came up with this really not nice nickname for her. So that leads me into my next question. How is Cinderella treated by her stepmother and stepsisters? You're right. Unfortunately, Cinderella was treated badly. They were not very kind to her, and they made her keep the whole house clean. She was responsible for everything with no help. That's not fair. In our story, we were introduced to Cinderella's fairy godmother. She came in to help her. The fairy godmother turned the pumpkin, the mice, and the rats into a coach, horses, and a coachman for her to go to the ball. But her fairy godmother also said something else. What warning does her fairy godmother give to Cinderella? Correct, yes. She told her that she needed to leave the ball before midnight. Do you know what time midnight is? Y'all are so smart. Yes, I'm gonna show you both here. So, what warning does her fairy godmother give her? To leave before midnight. And if you want to see what that would look like on a clock, it looks like this. So midnight, 12 o'clock. All right, last question, and this is the one where you have to think about. What parts of this folk tale could never really happen? You remember, I told you before, Cinderella is a special kind of folktale called a fairy tale, which means it has magic in it. So which parts of this folktale could never really happen? Think for a minute, pair with somebody if they're nearby, and then you can share your answer with me. Okay, so you're telling me that turning a pumpkin into a carriage, that can't happen? Okay. And fairy godmothers, that they don't know, just regular godmothers. Okay, yeah, they're pretty cool, but they're not fairies. Okay, what else? Mice into horses, good job. And anything else in the story? Well, yeah, probably dancing in glass shoes is a bad idea, but you could in theory make glass shoes. It's possible, just not a good idea. So not quite fantasy, but just highly unlikely. So the fantasy in the story was animals being turned into people and a pumpkin being turned into a carriage. Okay, so I have just one more thing I want to talk about with you today, and that is the word worthy. The word worthy. Can you say the word worthy with me? Worthy, good job. And worthy means a person or object deserves someone or something. So in this story, we were introduced to Cinderella, whose fairy godmother said she was worthy, which means she deserves something. And so from the fairy godmother, that meant being able to go to the ball. So I have another example. The two sisters were very talented and worthy of the awards they received. Or how about this one? I show my parents I am worthy of getting special privileges when I help without being asked. You see how by doing extra, they were able to earn extra special rewards. I have very much enjoyed discussing the word worthy with you, as well as reading the story of Cinderella. It's great that we're getting to read these fairy tales from different lands together, but until next time, bye.